Well, good morning. Today is the fourth day in the trial of former Grand Rapids police officer Christopher Schurr, who's charged with second-degree murder in the killing of Patrick Lyoya. We have crews live across downtown Grand Rapids, both inside and outside the courthouse, ready to bring you updates as they happen. 13 on your side's Callie Lichter and Riley Mack are inside the courthouse, viewing the trial live and updating our live blog on 13onyourside.com. Emily, Tanner, again, a very explosive day yesterday in the courtroom.
Yeah, of course, seeing the prosecution rest and the defense begin to take up their arguments, of course, after the first explosive moment with the defense motioning for the mistrial as well as that directed verdict. So really kind of right off the bat, things kind of getting somewhat exciting in the courtroom.
Yeah.
Exciting in that sense, but then also exciting when we really got into the meat of the testimony yesterday. There was one person specifically who will talk about, Captain David Siver, who directly contradicted the prosecution's last witness about the effectiveness of the taser. Again, seeing that taser get brought up in the conversation yet again. And I even when I walked into the newsroom early this morning, I said that it's really going to come down to the taser and how they spin that argument on either side.
Yeah, it's been such a pivotal part of the argument, really from the very beginning when we saw both sides give their opening statements, again with prosecution pretty much arguing that, hey, did Christopher Schurr truly have a right to fear for his life and therefore make this shooting justified? Because they're saying in the video you can see Patrick Lyoya, grab hold of the taser. And then, of course, on the other side, the defense is saying absolutely Schurr had a right to reasonably fear for his life because of the situation with the taser and therefore making the shooting justified. So yes, as you said, I mean, this has really been based on this taser, even though this was about a shooting death involving a gun, it's really been circling around that taser.
And what people saw on that taser. So it's so interesting, and to see it come back multiple times now to that taser and different perspectives of it. It's interesting to see what we'll see coming into day 4 and how they also call witnesses and ask them about that taser as well.
Well, as you remember, we ended the day with Captain Siver, so we're expecting him to see him back on the stand first thing as soon as court starts. And I think what was also interesting to see is the defense getting their chance to bring witnesses and the type of witnesses that they brought on. We didn't see anyone from GRPD with the prosecution, but that was a very different story for the defense. They brought in multiple people from, you can see right there, two officers, one former officer and a captain, all from GRPD. And we didn't even really see a very heavy testimony from the two officers, Kaladi and Ma, and former officer Johnson. But what we did see is them paint that picture of what they saw the day that this happened. Kind of what the prosecution did with the friends and the neighbor. The defense kind of did the same thing, asking the officers, did you see Schurr? Was he out of breath? Was he tired? And all of them confirming, yeah, we saw him, he was out of breath, normally in shape. So you're starting to see the defense try to create their case, but using people from GRPD.
Yeah, definitely at this time sort of switching perspectives, right? Really switching our vantage point from how we're taking in this information and the point of view it's being given from, right? Because the last several days as this all started, we're hearing from the prosecution, as you mentioned, the arguments they were making. Now we're beginning to hear from the defense, and what they're saying is really Christopher Schurr's perspective and why this happened the way that it did.
Also asking some of those GRPD witnesses that we heard from, their testimony about just some of the factors of that day after the fact and what they saw. Concerns about unknown threats from some of the occupants in the vehicle. I'm assuming that goes back to the occupant with Lyoya at the time as they were driving down the street there. Just really interesting to get their take on what happened and characterizing Officer Schurr, or then Officer Schurr's movements after the scene. So interesting testimony from them. I kind of see them as more of character witnesses than anything in this, because obviously we had our expert witnesses testify on some of the things involved in this, but some of those people from GRPD testifying to the character and the facts of what happened after all of this went down.
I also think you saw the defense really trying to create their case about Schurr doing the right thing, the justified thing that day. You see them talking with all these officers, former officer and the captain, about the policies with GRPD, asking them what are the policies in terms of, a police chase or someone having a taser, control of a taser, a gun. And you actually kind of start to see them take bits and pieces from Stoughton the day before and kind of asking them, is what he said in line with you all? I think at one point in time, they asked Captain Siver, is a taser the same thing as a thumb? You remember Stoughton said, whether it's a thumb or a taser, if you're blind, you're blind. Well, they asked Siver kind of that same question, is a thumb the same thing as a taser? Siver saying, well, no, a taser obviously hurts way more. So you're starting to see them take those pieces from the prosecution and apply it to their witnesses.
Well, at this point, the defense has to kind of counteract what the prosecution was arguing there. They kind of have to take that, use it to their advantage, and then ask their questions based off of what the prosecution's argument is at this point to kind of disprove or discredit what they were trying to put into motion there. Very interesting how they've kind of started to formulate that, and you can very much see the landscape that they're going for in the defensive argument here in order to prove that Christopher Schurr is not guilty of second-degree murder.
And we could see that really already with the defense and their cross-examinations of some of the prosecution's witnesses, even with some of their objections, right? We know that the defense didn't want to hear from some of the witnesses the prosecution was referring to as experts. The defense took issue with that, mainly because the policies that some of the prosecution witnesses were talking about were more general standard policies, not so much related to policing here in Grand Rapids, of course, what is surrounding this case. So not all that surprising that, as you said, Lauren, they're essentially trying to take a lot of the testimony we previously heard and break that apart now with people who have worked in Grand Rapids in law enforcement.
You're talking about some of the arguments made by the prosecution's witnesses. You're talking about things that they said that the defense argued that these two witnesses that we're specifically talking about at the end of the prosecution's case, they were arguing that their arguments or their testimony is not in line, like with what you said, with Michigan law or GRPD policy. And that is essentially where that first firework came off after the prosecution's case rested, as the defense asked for that mistrial and then they asked for that directed verdict. So that's kind of where we really started to see the gears turn toward that motion for a mistrial about midday yesterday, which really caused a lot of fireworks in the courtroom.
And we do want to let people watching know that the judge has walked into the courtroom. Obviously, we can't show you that because, again, we're still on that court-mandated 30-minute delay. But it seems like court is going to be starting pretty fast compared to yesterday. We didn't start court until roughly 9 o'clock yesterday.
This was something that we were wondering yesterday, you know, is the day, or, you know, are these days going to start later and later depending on, you know, if there are any chamber arguments happening or just any other factors from the court. We've been wondering that if that's going to start to be the trend, is we're going to start later and later. But I think something that the judge said yesterday during that first bit of testimony, I believe it was the first witness that they called up on the defensive side, the video analyst, when they started to go through the video and then take screenshots of each frame and say, hey, we're going to enter this into evidence. Something that Judge Mims said was like, okay, is this useful of our time here in the courtroom? So I almost wonder if she's being cognizant of the time that they do have in this trial span. Again, we are nearing a full work week of trial testimony here. So I almost wonder if she's trying to use every bit of time to their advantage.
And we did just get word that Siver is taking the stand again, but again, you won't see that for the next 30 minutes. But I want to go back to your point on that. You know, we spoke with legal experts on that, and they said that what the defense did is not wrong. You actually see that happen all the time. Maybe they'll bring up a picture and they might circle it or say, let's zoom in onto this picture. So what they're actually was doing is very typical in cases like these. It's just the fact that it was taking a long time. That's why they decided to, the prosecution decided to object and the judge decided to agree with. But another thing that's important with that is that they can still do that outside the courthouse. I mean, outside the courtroom.
Right.
They can zoom into those pictures and then bring that evidence back in, allow McFarland to take the stand again, and then talk about those things. So it's not like the jurors, even if they have questions of, oh, I want to see that zoomed in, it's not like they can't. They definitely can. They just couldn't do that in that moment.
They can also ask the question to see that as well.
Right.
Yeah, that's been a part of our conversation this morning. You talked about things that weren't all that unusual for the courtrooms. We go back to those explosive moments with the mistrial and the directed verdict, at least the defense's attempt at those motions. We were having a conversation this morning that really isn't all that unusual to see in criminal trials, especially once the prosecution rests. Why wouldn't they make that attempt to say, well, hey, we don't believe the prosecution has done their job sufficiently. Maybe things should end right at this moment. So kind of a bombshell moment for us where we thought, hey, this thing could be ending right now. Of course, the judge denied both of those motions, but we're learning that really isn't all that unusual to see the defense make those motions in a criminal trial.
How I kind of take it is, that the defense kind of gets that one free card of, okay, hey, end this thing.
Yeah.
We think that we've seen enough here.
And we'll see if it sticks.
Yeah, exactly. So you can see why that would be a common thing for the defense to pull. As we're learning, it is pretty common.
Yeah, and I'm curious. I hope maybe after this trial we'll be able to get the experience, maybe not on camera, but just to talk to, or not talk directly to the jurors, but just maybe someone who's been in this type of situation to kind of understand what it's like to hear those objectives and motions. As a juror, I imagine, these are not legal experts. They live in our community and they were picked to be on this jury. So I can imagine that, you've had to learn so many legal things within this short week, and then you get things thrown at you like that. And we did get confirmed that the jury was not in the room when those motions were made, but still, I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to get all this information, then find out the defense is like, oh, actually, there's enough to show that this case is over. It's like, that's just so much.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. And, we not only just from that alone, that one bombshell, well, I guess not really a bombshell that we know now, but also just the testimony. We've now heard from more than a dozen people over the course of 5 days. I mean, brains have got to be exhausted at this point.
Yeah, and that's the biggest question I think now on everyone else's mind. How long will this go on at this point? How many more witnesses will the defense call? Now, of course, when this first started, we had word that the prosecution had 11 different witnesses they could call, the defense about 40. So, how long will this go on? How many of those 40 witnesses will they call? Of course, they've already called 5 of their witnesses, I believe, yesterday. And then, of course, the main question, will Christopher Schurr be one of those witnesses?
Yeah, I think we should address that, there may have been reports that they have a couple more witnesses out there. I think that was reported by another outlet this morning. I think at this point we should just wait and see what happens here. If they have a couple of more witnesses to call and it's just that said and done, then all right, then we'll see that and we'll see this trial wrap up pretty quickly. But at this point, we were told, like you said, 40 at the beginning of this trial. We could see that take anywhere from all of next week, maybe even beyond. We don't know. And I think at this point, it's hard to put a number on that. It's really hard to kind of really zero in on those facts because at this point, we're not sure what the defense team is thinking.
Yeah.
We're not sure what their strategy is at this point. So we just have to kind of wait and see on the length of the trial.
And in regards to those witnesses, is how long they're actually on the stand. We saw multiple people yesterday. They were on the stand for 5 minutes, if that. No cross-examination from the prosecution, no questions, after. So in theory, yeah, they could have 40 people more, but
right.
If they're on the stand for 2, 3, 5 minutes, I mean, that doesn't take up a whole week.
Yeah, and that's compared to people who are on the stand for hours, several hours. So, to your point, will it be quick where we're able to go through multiple witnesses, or are we going to get those that we're going to have to take some days on the stand?